Dr. Elena Volkov pressed her security badge against the reader and stepped through the reinforced steel doors of Building 9 at Los Alamos National Laboratory. The autumn of 1944 brought an unusual chill to the New Mexico desert, but the cold she felt had nothing to do with the weather. For 3 weeks now, she had been investigating the mysterious disappearance of her colleague, Dr. Marcus Chen, one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists on the Manhattan Project. Chen had been working on what was officially classified as secondary radiation studies, but Elena knew better. The equations she had glimpsed on his blackboard before his vanishing suggested something far more complex than simple atomic bomb calculations. The mathematical framework resembled theoretical work on dimensional physics, research that shouldn't have existed in 1944, yet somehow did. The official story was that Chen had suffered a nervous breakdown and been transferred to a psychiatric facility back east. But Elena had seen the security footage timestamp discrepancies, the hastily cleaned laboratory, and the subtle changes in personnel assignments that suggested a cover-up. More troubling still were the reports from night shift workers who claimed to have seen strange lights emanating from the restricted underground levels that didn't appear on any official building schematics. As she walked through the corridors lined with photographs of America's greatest scientific minds, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the Manhattan Project was merely a cover story for something far more sinister. The atomic bomb was real enough. She had run calculations on the plutonium implosion design herself. But what if it was just one component of a larger, more terrifying agenda? Her investigation would soon reveal that some secrets were buried so deep that even the scientists working on them didn't fully understand what they were creating. Block 2. The Underground Revelation. Elena's first breakthrough came through an accidental discovery in the facility's outdated filing system. While researching plutonium enrichment data, she stumbled upon a misfiled document labeled Project Chronos, Phase 3 Authorization. The papers contained references to temporal displacement experiments and causality loop stabilization, terms that made her blood run cold. The document was signed by Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer himself, along with several names she didn't recognize, scientists who apparently held clearance levels above top secret. What disturbed her most was the date. The authorization was issued 6 months before the first atomic bomb test, suggesting that Chronos had been running parallel to the public Manhattan Project from the very beginning. That night, Elena made a decision that would change her life forever. Using her legitimate security clearance and knowledge of the facility's shift rotations, she gained access to Sublevel 3, a floor that officially didn't exist. The descent took her through a maze of concrete corridors that felt more like a tomb than a research facility. The first laboratory she discovered contained equipment unlike anything she had seen before. Massive copper coils surrounded a central chamber filled with what appeared to be a swirling, luminescent gas. Banks of primitive computers, decades ahead of anything that should have existed in 1944, monitored incomprehensible data streams. The air itself seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy that made her teeth ache. But it was the second laboratory that truly shattered her understanding of reality. Behind reinforced glass, she watched as technicians in full radiation suits manipulated what could only be described as a tear in space itself, a shimmering portal that offered glimpses of landscapes that definitely weren't part of New Mexico in 1944. Block 3. The Impossible Technology. Elena's scientific training told her that what she was witnessing was impossible. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The technology she observed was clearly decades, perhaps centuries ahead of its time. The question that haunted her was not whether it existed, but how it had come to exist in a secret laboratory beneath Los Alamos in 1944. Her covert investigation revealed a paper trail that led to some of the most disturbing implications imaginable. Purchase orders for exotic materials that wouldn't be discovered by mainstream science until the 1980s. Personnel files for researchers with advanced degrees from universities that didn't yet offer those programs. Most chilling of all, maintenance logs that referenced equipment repairs using future-sourced components. The pattern that emerged, suggested that the Manhattan Project had somehow gained access to technology from the future, technology that was being reverse-engineered and adapted for purposes she couldn't yet fathom. The atomic bomb program, she realized, might have been designed not just to end World War II, but to establish America's dominance through control of time itself. Elena discovered that Dr. Chen had been working on the theoretical framework for what the documents called causal engineering, the ability to make precise alterations to the timeline that would ripple forward through history. His research notes, hidden in his laboratory's ventilation system, revealed calculations for preventing specific historical events, ensuring particular individuals were never born, and subtly guiding technological development along predetermined paths. The implications were staggering. If successful, Project Chronos would give its controllers the power to reshape history itself, ensuring that America emerged not just as a nuclear superpower, but as the dominant force in human civilization for all time. But the technology came with risks that Chen's notes described as potentially catastrophic to the fabric of reality itself. Block 4. The source of knowledge. Elena's investigation led her to perhaps the most disturbing discovery of all: the origin of the futuristic technology. Deep in the classified archives, she found references to the Philadelphia Acquisition, a mysterious event that had occurred in 1943, 1 year before the mysterious appearance of advanced technology at Los Alamos. The files describe the recovery of what officials termed temporal debris from an experimental Navy project that had gone catastrophically wrong. The USS Eldridge, according to these classified documents, had not simply disappeared and reappeared as naval records claimed. Instead, the ship had briefly phased into what scientists called temporal flux, creating a window between 1943 and an undetermined future date. In the few minutes before the ship returned to normal spacetime, recovery teams had managed to extract materials and data storage devices of obviously futuristic origin. These artifacts became the foundation for Project Chronos, providing the technological roadmap that allowed 1940s scientists to build equipment they couldn't possibly have conceived on their own. Elena found inventory lists that read like science fiction: crystalline storage matrices containing terabytes of data, portable fusion reactors the size of briefcases, and most significantly, detailed plans for something called the temporal anchor, a device designed to prevent paradoxes by creating stable causal loops that could accommodate changes to the timeline. The more she learned, the more Elena realized that the Manhattan Project as history knew it was an elaborate cover story. While the world focused on atomic weapons, a small group of scientists and military officials were secretly building the infrastructure for something far more ambitious: a shadow government with the power to rewrite history itself. Block 5. The human cost. Elena's investigation took a darker turn when she discovered the human experimentation records hidden within Project Chronos. The files revealed that testing the temporal displacement technology required human subjects, volunteers and conscripts who were subjected to procedures that pushed the boundaries of scientific ethics far beyond anything publicly known. Subject files detailed men and women who had been exposed to what researchers called chronoton radiation, resulting in effects that ranged from accelerated aging to what could only be described as temporal schizophrenia, a condition where subjects experienced multiple timelines simultaneously. Many subjects developed an ability to perceive probability shadows, glimpsing alternate versions of events that might have been. The most disturbing cases involved subjects who had been deliberately sent forward in time for reconnaissance missions. These temporal scouts returned with detailed intelligence about future technologies, political developments, and scientific breakthroughs that would occur decades later. However, the psychological toll was severe. Most scouts suffered complete mental breakdown within months of their return. Elena discovered that Dr. Chen had been one of the few researchers raising ethical concerns about the human experimentation program. His notes revealed growing unease about the project's direction and its potential consequences for humanity. In his final entry, written just days before his disappearance, Chen had written, "We have become time's vampires, feeding on the future to gorge ourselves in the present. God help us all. The files also revealed that many of the missing persons cases in the Los Alamos area during 1943-1945 weren't random disappearances. Local residents had been recruited or kidnapped for use as test subjects. Their disappearances covered up by official explanations ranging from military accidents to voluntary relocations for classified work. Block 6. The Controllers. Elena's investigation revealed that Project Chronos was not controlled by the U.S. military or government, but by a shadowy organization that existed outside normal command structures. This group, which called itself the Temporal Directorate, included scientists, military officials, and civilians who had been carefully selected for their specific skills and their willingness to operate beyond conventional moral boundaries. The Directorate's membership roster read like a who's who of influential figures from politics, science, and industry.
Many names she recognized from newspapers and scientific journals, but their involvement in Project Chronos revealed a hidden dimension to their public personas. These individuals weren't just building atomic weapons, they were positioning themselves to control the flow of history itself.
Elena discovered meeting minutes that outlined the Directorate's long-term goals, preventing the rise of competing superpowers, ensuring American technological supremacy through controlled release of future innovations, and establishing what they termed optimal historical outcomes through precise temporal interventions. The atomic bomb was merely the first step in a plan that extended centuries into the future. The group's power came not just from their control of temporal technology, but from their knowledge of future events. They had used information from temporal scouts to make strategic investments, forge political alliances, and eliminate potential threats before they could develop. In essence, they had created a self-perpetuating system where their foreknowledge allowed them to accumulate the resources necessary to maintain their temporal advantage. Most chilling was their Paradox Prevention Protocol, a systematic plan to eliminate individuals whose existence might interfere with their preferred timeline. The protocol included detailed files on thousands of people around the world who were marked for temporal correction, a euphemism for assassination that would appear to be accidents or natural causes. Block 7. The Resistance. Elena's investigation revealed that she wasn't the only one who had stumbled upon the truth about Project Chronos. A small group of scientists and military personnel had formed a resistance movement within Los Alamos, working to expose the Temporal Directorate and prevent their plans from reaching fruition. This underground network included Dr. Marcus Chen, whose disappearance had been orchestrated not by the Directorate, but by the resistance itself. Chen had faked his breakdown and extraction to go into hiding, using his knowledge of the facility's blind spots to establish a hidden base of operations within the complex itself. Elena made contact with the resistance through a coded message system hidden within routine scientific correspondence. The group's leader was Colonel James Mitchell, a military liaison who had discovered the Directorate's plans through his own investigation into personnel anomalies and budget discrepancies. The resistance had been collecting evidence of the Directorate's activities for months, building a comprehensive case that could expose the entire operation. However, they faced a seemingly impossible challenge. How do you fight an enemy that can literally rewrite history to eliminate threats before they emerge? The Resistance's strategy centered on something they called the Chronos Documentation Project, a plan to create an information cache that would exist outside the normal timeline, protected from temporal manipulation by the same technology the Directorate was using. Their goal was to ensure that evidence of Project Chronos would survive any attempts to alter history, creating a permanent record that could be discovered by future investigators. Elena realized that her investigation had led her to the front lines of a war that most people didn't even know existed, a battle for the very nature of reality itself. Block 8. The First Test. Elena's intelligence gathering revealed that the Temporal Directorate was preparing for their first major test of the temporal intervention technology. Codenamed Operation Destiny's Gate, the test was scheduled to coincide with the Trinity atomic bomb test in July 1945. Using the massive energy release to power what they called the Great Alteration. The Directorate's plan was audacious in its scope. They intended to make a series of subtle changes to key events in 1920s Germany, preventing the rise of Adolf Hitler while ensuring that a more manageable fascist leader took his place. This would allow World War II to proceed along similar lines while eliminating the Holocaust and reducing the war's overall devastation. On the surface, the plan seemed humanitarian, saving millions of lives while preserving the geopolitical outcome that would establish America as a superpower. However, Elena discovered darker implications in the classified planning documents. The Directorate's real goal was to create a timeline where America faced less international opposition to its expansion, where rival powers were weakened, and where future technological development proceeded along paths that favored their long-term interests. The Resistance realized that Operation Destiny's Gate represented a point of no return. Once the Directorate successfully demonstrated their ability to alter major historical events, they would become effectively unstoppable. Any future resistance could be eliminated before it began through targeted temporal interventions. Elena and her allies began planning a desperate countermeasure. If they couldn't prevent Operation Destiny's Gate, they would at least ensure that evidence of the Directorate's existence survived in multiple timelines. Their plan involved creating what they called probability anchors, information caches hidden in locations that would remain stable regardless of timeline alterations. Block 9. The Race Against Time. With Operation Destiny's Gate scheduled for July 16, 1945, the same day as the Trinity test, Elena and the Resistance found themselves in a race against time that had literal rather than figurative implications. The Directorate had integrated their temporal experiment with the atomic bomb test, using the nuclear explosion as both a cover story and a power source for their dimensional manipulations. Elena's analysis of the technical specifications revealed the terrifying scope of the Directorate's capabilities. The temporal intervention device would create what physicists called a causal shockwave, rippling backward through time to make precisely calculated alterations to historical events. The mathematics suggested that the changes would propagate through the timeline like dominoes, creating a cascade of alterations that would reshape the entire 20th century. The Resistance's efforts to sabotage Operation Destiny's Gate were complicated by the Directorate's security measures. The temporal intervention device was hidden within the Trinity test site itself, camouflaged as part of the atomic bomb monitoring equipment. Any attempt to interfere with the device would risk disrupting the nuclear test, potentially causing a catastrophic accident that could kill thousands. Elena discovered that the Directorate had anticipated Resistance efforts and had prepared contingency plans that involved eliminating key opposition figures through temporal assassination. Several Resistance members had already disappeared, and Elena realized that her own investigation had placed her on the Directorate's target list. The Resistance's only hope lay in a desperate gambit. They would use the Directorate's own technology against them, creating a competing temporal intervention that would either cancel out Operation Destiny's Gate or create such severe paradoxes that both interventions would fail. Block 10. The Hidden Laboratory. Elena's search for a way to counter Operation Destiny's Gate led her to the discovery of an abandoned laboratory deep beneath the Los Alamos complex. This facility, which appeared to predate the Manhattan Project by several decades, contained technology that was even more advanced than anything the Directorate possessed. The laboratory's most shocking feature was a series of inscriptions carved into the concrete walls. Inscriptions in Elena's own handwriting, describing events that hadn't yet occurred. The messages appeared to be from a future version of herself, warning about the consequences of the Directorate's temporal interventions and providing technical specifications for a device that could neutralize their technology. The implications were staggering. Elena realized that she was not discovering this hidden laboratory for the first time, but rediscovering it. Somehow, a future version of herself had traveled back in time to prepare for this exact situation, creating a stable temporal loop that would allow the Resistance to succeed. The future Elena's notes revealed that Operation Destiny's Gate had indeed succeeded in the original timeline, creating a world where the temporal Directorate ruled from the shadows for decades. However, Their control eventually led to a dystopian future where temporal manipulation had destabilized reality itself, creating paradoxes and anomalies that threatened to unravel the entire space-time continuum. The hidden laboratory contained a device that the future Elena called the Paradox Engine, a machine designed to create controlled temporal paradoxes that would force reality to reset certain events while preserving others. The device would allow the Resistance to undo Operation Destiny's Gate without completely erasing the Manhattan Project or preventing the end of World War II. Block 11. The double agent Elena's investigation revealed a shocking truth. Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific director of the Manhattan Project, was secretly working against the Temporal Directorate. His famous quote about becoming "Death, Destroyer of Worlds" took on new meaning when Elena discovered that he was referring not to atomic weapons, but to the temporal manipulation technology that threatened to destroy reality itself. Oppenheimer had been recruited by the Directorate in the early stages of the Manhattan Project, but had gradually become horrified by their plans. His theatrical personality and apparent obsession with ancient literature were actually part of an elaborate cover, hiding his efforts to sabotage the Directorate's operations from within. Elena learned that Oppenheimer had been secretly feeding information to the Resistance while maintaining his public role as a loyal member of the Directorate. His security clearance and position gave him access to the most classified aspects of Project Chronos, allowing him to provide crucial intelligence about Operation Destiny's Gate. However, Oppenheimer's double agent status came with enormous risks. The Directorate had become suspicious of security leaks within their organization, and they had begun conducting what they called loyalty verification procedures, essentially using temporal technology to observe their own members' past and future actions. Elena realized that Oppenheimer's cooperation with the Resistance was on borrowed time. The Directorate would eventually discover his betrayal, and when they did, they would use their temporal intervention capabilities to eliminate him from the timeline entirely. The Resistance needed to act quickly before their most valuable asset could be erased from history. Block 12. The Moral Dilemma. As Elena delved deeper into the Resistance's plans to counter Operation Destiny's Gate, she faced a profound moral dilemma that challenged everything she believed about right and wrong.
The Directorate's intervention, while motivated by power and control, would indeed prevent the Holocaust and potentially save millions of lives. By opposing them, the Resistance was essentially choosing to preserve a timeline that included some of history's greatest tragedies. The future Elena's notes provided additional context that made the decision even more complex.
In the original timeline where Operation Destiny's Gate succeeded, the prevented Holocaust was replaced by different but equally horrific atrocities as the Directorate manipulated events to serve their interests. The saved lives in Europe were balanced by additional deaths in Asia and Africa, as the Directorate engineered conflicts that would benefit American expansion. Moreover, the Directorate's control of temporal technology eventually led to what the future Elena called the Great Stagnation, a period where human progress was artificially limited to prevent the development of technologies that might threaten the Directorate's power. Scientific advancement was carefully controlled, social movements were suppressed before they could gain momentum, and individual freedom gradually eroded as the Directorate's influence expanded. Elena struggled with the knowledge that preventing Operation Destiny's Gate would preserve a timeline that included tremendous suffering, while allowing it to proceed would prevent that suffering at the cost of human freedom and natural historical development. The Resistance faced the ultimate philosophical question. Was it better to accept history's tragedies, or to hand control of human destiny to a small group of powerful individuals? The future Elena's final message provided guidance. The right to make mistakes, to suffer, and to overcome that suffering through our own efforts is what makes us human. Those who would spare us from tragedy by controlling our choices spare us from our humanity itself. Block 13. The countdown begins with Operation Destiny's Gate. Less than 48 hours away, Elena and the Resistance began their desperate countermeasure operation. The Paradox Engine, reconstructed from the future Elena's specifications, was hidden within the Trinity test site's own infrastructure, camouflaged to look like routine monitoring equipment. The Resistance's plan was extraordinarily risky. They would wait until the Directorate activated their temporal intervention device, then use the paradox engine to create a competing temporal field that would neutralize the historical alterations. The two interventions would essentially cancel each other out, preserving the original timeline while preventing the Directorate from gaining the power that successful temporal manipulation would provide. However, the plan required precise timing and coordination. If the paradox engine activated too early or too late, it could either fail to neutralize the Directorate's intervention or create paradoxes so severe that they would damage the space-time continuum itself. Elena and her allies had only one chance to get it right. The Directorate, meanwhile, had increased security around the Trinity site to unprecedented levels. They had positioned their own agents throughout the facility, and their temporal scouts had provided them with intelligence about potential resistance activities. Elena realized that the Directorate might already know about their plans, making their mission even more dangerous. As the countdown to Trinity began, Elena felt the weight of history pressing down on her. The next 48 hours would determine not just the outcome of World War II, but the entire future of human civilization. The Resistance was literally fighting for the right of humanity to control its own destiny. Block 14. The discovery of the truth. In the final hours before Operation Destiny's Gate, Elena made a discovery that changed everything she thought she knew about the situation. While conducting a final check on the paradox engine systems, she found a hidden data cache that contained the complete history of the Temporal Directorate, a history that extended far beyond the 1940s. The files revealed that the Directorate had not originated in the 20th century, but had been operating in various forms for over 200 years. The group had been founded in the late 18th century by individuals who had somehow gained access to temporal technology through means that the files described only as the original contact. Since then, they had been gradually influencing historical events to guide human civilization along predetermined paths. The American Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, the Civil War, and both World Wars had all been influenced by Directorate interventions. Major historical figures, scientific breakthroughs, and social movements had been carefully orchestrated to serve the Directorate's long-term goals. Elena realized that the history she thought she knew was actually an artificial construct shaped by centuries of temporal manipulation. The Manhattan Project itself was the culmination of the Directorate's work, not just to create atomic weapons, but to develop the advanced temporal technology that would allow them to implement their ultimate plan, the Final Adjustment, a massive temporal intervention that would restructure human civilization to eliminate war, poverty, and conflict entirely. Elena discovered that the Directorate genuinely believed they were saving humanity from itself. Their vision was of a world where suffering was minimized through careful management of historical events, where technological progress proceeded at an optimal pace, and where human potential was maximized through guided evolution. However, this utopian vision came at the cost of free will, spontaneity, and the fundamental unpredictability that made human existence meaningful. Block 15. The Last Resistance. The revelation about the Directorate's true scope and history divided the Resistance. Some members argued that opposing an organization with 200 years of experience in temporal manipulation was hopeless, while others insisted that the fight for human freedom was worth any sacrifice. Elena found herself in the position of making the ultimate decision. As the person with the most complete understanding of both the Directorate's technology and the Resistance's capabilities, she had to choose whether to proceed with the paradox engine operation or to abandon the Resistance and accept the Directorate's vision of controlled history. The future Elena's notes provided one final piece of crucial information. The Directorate's power was not absolute. Their temporal interventions created small instabilities in the space-time continuum that accumulated over time. Eventually, these instabilities would reach a critical threshold that would cause what physicists called temporal cascade failure, a catastrophic collapse of the artificial timeline that would restore the original, unmanipulated history. However,
This natural correction would take centuries to occur, and the collapse process would be incredibly destructive, potentially wiping out entire civilizations as the timeline restructured itself. The paradox engine offered a way to trigger this correction in a controlled manner, restoring natural history while minimizing the damage to the present. Elena realized that the resistance was not just fighting for the 1940s, but for all of human history. Every generation that lived under the Directorate's influence was denied the authentic experience of making their own choices and facing the consequences. The resistance was fighting to give humanity back its right to succeed or fail on its own terms. Block 16, the Trinity Deception. July 16, 1945 dawned clear and hot over the Alamogordo Desert. As scientists and military personnel prepared for what they believed was simply the first test of an atomic weapon, Elena and the resistance made their final preparations for a battle that would determine the fate of human history. The Directorate had positioned their temporal intervention device within the Trinity Tower itself, hidden among the legitimate monitoring equipment that would record the nuclear explosion. Their plan was elegant in its simplicity. Use the atomic blast's enormous energy release to power their temporal manipulation while ensuring that any evidence of their technology would be vaporized in the explosion. Elena and her allies had managed to install the paradox engine in a concealed location approximately 1 mile from ground zero, close enough to interfere with the Directorate's device but far enough away to survive the nuclear blast. The Resistance's equipment was disguised as a weather monitoring station, complete with fake personnel who would evacuate just before the detonation. As the countdown to Trinity began, Elena positioned herself in the main observation bunker, where she could monitor both the nuclear test and the temporal intervention attempt. She carried a small device that would allow her to activate the paradox engine at the crucial moment, but she would have only seconds to react when the Directorate's intervention began. The tension in the observation bunker was palpable, but not for the reasons most people assumed. While the other scientists focused on the historic atomic test, Elena was preparing for a battle that would be fought in dimensions beyond normal human perception. Block 17. The Moment of Truth. At 5:29 a.m., the Trinity device detonated with a force that exceeded all expectations. The brilliant flash lit up the desert like a second sunrise, followed by the characteristic mushroom cloud that would become the symbol of the atomic age. But for Elena, the nuclear explosion was just the beginning of the real test. As the Directorate's temporal intervention device activated, Elena felt reality itself begin to shift around her. The sensation was indescribable, like watching the world become fluid, with past and present blending together in impossible ways. She could see ghostly overlays of alternate timelines, glimpses of what history was being changed to become. Through her temporal monitoring equipment, Elena watched as the Directorate's intervention reached back through time toward 1920s Germany. She could see the cascade of changes beginning to propagate forward. Hitler's rise to power being prevented, different leaders emerging, millions of lives being saved, and the Directorate's control over human destiny being established forever. This was the moment she had trained for. Elena activated the paradox engine, sending her own temporal shockwave to intersect with the Directorate's intervention. The two temporal fields collided with an energy release that registered on instruments as a secondary explosion, though the observers in the bunker assumed it was just an echo of the nuclear blast. The collision between the competing temporal interventions created exactly the effect Elena had hoped for, a cascade of paradoxes that forced reality to reset to its original state. The changes to 1920s Germany were undone, but so was the Directorate's control over the temporal technology. The competing interventions had neutralized each other, preserving the authentic timeline while denying the Directorate their victory. Block 18. The Aftermath. In the hours following the Trinity test, Elena watched as the Directorate's carefully laid plans unraveled. The failure of Operation Destiny's Gate had created what the future Elena's notes called temporal feedback, a phenomenon that disrupted the Directorate's ability to use their technology for several years. The members of the Directorate found themselves unable to access their temporal intervention capabilities, effectively cutting them off from the source of their power. Without the ability to manipulate events through time travel, they were reduced to ordinary,
if wealthy and well-connected individuals. Elena and the resistance used this window of opportunity to implement their own long-term strategy. They created hidden archives of information about the Directorate and Project Chronos, ensuring that future generations would have the knowledge necessary to recognize and resist temporal manipulation. The resistance also worked to identify and neutralize the Directorate's agents throughout government and industry. While they couldn't completely eliminate the organization, they managed to significantly reduce its influence and prevent it from regaining control of temporal technology. However, Elena knew that their victory was only temporary. The future Elena's notes warned that the Directorate would eventually find new ways to access temporal manipulation technology, and the battle for human freedom would have to be fought again by future generations. Block 19. The Cover-Up. In the weeks following Trinity, Elena watched as the official cover-up of Project Chronos unfolded. The existence of temporal manipulation technology was classified at levels beyond even the atomic bomb project, with all evidence being systematically destroyed or hidden. The participants in Project Chronos were reassigned to other projects, given cover stories to explain their presence at Los Alamos, or in some cases quietly eliminated. Dr. Marcus Chen and other resistance members were officially listed as casualties of laboratory accidents, though Elena knew they had actually gone into deep hiding to avoid Directorate retaliation. The advanced technology that had been recovered from the USS Eldridge was carefully studied and then locked away in secret facilities, deemed too dangerous for immediate use. Elena managed to ensure that some of this technology was hidden in locations where future resistance movements could find it, should the need arise. The official history of the Manhattan Project made no mention of temporal experiments, dimensional physics, or the shadow war that had been fought alongside the development of atomic weapons. To the world, Los Alamos was simply the birthplace of the nuclear age, not the site of humanity's first successful defense of its own timeline. Elena herself accepted a new identity and assignment, becoming Dr. Elena Valdez, a radiological specialist studying the long-term effects of nuclear testing. Her new role gave her the perfect cover to monitor for signs of renewed Directorate activity, while appearing to be engaged in legitimate scientific research. Block 20. The Hidden Legacy. Years passed, and Elena established a secret network of scientists, military personnel and civilians who were aware of the Directorate's existence and committed to preventing their return to power. This network, which called itself the Chronos Watch, operated entirely in the shadows, its members maintaining normal lives while secretly monitoring for temporal anomalies. Elena's investigation had revealed that the Directorate's influence extended far beyond the United States. Similar organizations existed in other countries, all connected through their shared access to temporal technology. The Cold War, Elena realized, was partly a cover for a hidden conflict between different factions seeking to control time itself. The Chronos Watch documented numerous instances of suspected temporal interference throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Historical events that seemed to have unfolded too conveniently, technological breakthroughs that appeared ahead of schedule, and political developments that served mysterious long-term agendas. Elena's network also tracked the gradual dispersal of Directorate members into positions of influence throughout American society. Many became leaders in aerospace, computing, and nuclear industries, positioning themselves to control the development of technologies that might eventually restore their temporal capabilities. The Watch maintained several secure archives containing evidence of the Directorate's activities, hidden in locations around the world. These archives were designed to survive nuclear war, natural disasters, and temporal manipulation, ensuring that future generations would have access to the truth about humanity's hidden history. Block 21. The Next Generation. As Elena aged, she began training the next generation of the Chronos Watch, passing on her knowledge and experience to younger scientists and researchers who showed the curiosity and courage necessary to confront the Directorate's influence. Among her protégés was Dr. Sarah Chen, Marcus Chen's daughter, who had grown up hearing carefully coded stories about her father's work at Los Alamos. Sarah inherited her father's brilliance in theoretical physics, along with his commitment to human freedom. making her a natural leader for the Watch's future operations. Elena shared with Sarah the complete files from the future Elena, including technical specifications for temporal detection equipment and early warning systems that could identify Directorate activity. This knowledge would prove crucial as new technologies emerged that could potentially be adapted for temporal manipulation. The Watch also established connections with similar resistance movements in other countries, creating an international network dedicated to preventing any organization from gaining control over time itself. These connections proved that the threat of temporal manipulation was global, requiring a coordinated response. Elena's final contribution to the Watch was a comprehensive training manual that detailed everything she had learned about temporal physics, Directorate operations, and resistance strategies. This manual, hidden in multiple secure locations, would serve as a guide for future generations who might face similar threats. Block 22. The modern threat. Elena's worst fears were realized in the 1980s when Chronos Watch monitoring stations began detecting subtle temporal anomalies that suggested renewed Directorate activity. The organization had apparently found new ways to access temporal manipulation technology, possibly through advances in computer technology and quantum physics. The new generation of Directorate operations was more sophisticated than anything Elena had encountered in the 1940s. Instead of dramatic alterations to major historical events, they were making tiny, precise changes that were almost impossible to detect, but had significant cumulative effects over time. Sarah Chen, now leading the Chronos Watch, discovered evidence that the Directorate was using early computer networks to coordinate their activities and store temporal intervention data. The rise of personal computers and the early internet provided new opportunities for both surveillance and manipulation that the original resistance had never anticipated. Elena, now in her 70s, found herself once again at the center of a battle for human freedom. The Directorate's new approach required equally sophisticated countermeasures, and the Watch began developing computer-based monitoring systems that could detect temporal interference through statistical analysis of historical data. The discovery that the Directorate was adapting to modern technology confirmed Elena's understanding that this would be an ongoing struggle. Each generation would face new forms of temporal manipulation and would need to develop new methods of resistance. Block 23. The Eternal Vigil. Elena's final journal entry, written shortly before her death in 1995, served as both a warning and an inspiration for future generations of the Chronos Watch. She had spent 50 years fighting a war that most people didn't even know existed, protecting humanity's right to control its own destiny. Her investigation into the Manhattan Project's dark secrets had revealed that the battle for human freedom was not a single conflict, but an ongoing struggle that would continue as long as humans possessed the technology to manipulate time. Each generation would need its own heroes, its own resistance movements, and its own commitment to preserving authentic history. The Chronos Watch continued its vigilant monitoring into the 21st century, adapting its methods to new technologies while maintaining its core mission. Elena's legacy lived on in the network of researchers, scientists, and ordinary citizens who understood that the price of freedom was eternal vigilance against those who would control human destiny from the shadows. In her final years, Elena had uncovered evidence that the Directorate's influence extended far beyond what she had initially imagined. The organization had apparently survived the failure of Operation Destiny's Gate and had continued operating through carefully placed agents in government, academia, and industry. Their methods had evolved from dramatic temporal interventions to subtle manipulations of technological development and social trends. Elena's research revealed a pattern of suspicious coincidences throughout the Cold War period. Key scientific breakthroughs occurred exactly when they would be most beneficial to American interests. Political leaders who might have opposed certain policies suffered convenient accidents or sudden changes of heart. International crises resolved themselves in ways that consistently favored the emergence of a unipolar world order dominated by the United States. The Directorate had apparently learned from their failure at Trinity that massive temporal interventions were too risky and detectable. Instead, they had adopted a strategy of what Elena termed temporal gardening, making tiny adjustments to the flow of events that would accumulate over decades to produce desired outcomes. This approach was virtually undetectable using conventional methods, requiring the Chronos watch to develop increasingly sophisticated monitoring techniques. Elena's final major discovery came in 1994, when she identified what appeared to be preparations for a new major temporal intervention. The Directorate had apparently decided that the end of the Cold War provided an opportunity to implement what their internal communications called the Millennium Project, a comprehensive reshaping of global civilization to prepare for the challenges of the 21st century. This new operation would be far more ambitious than Operation Destiny's Gate. Instead of preventing specific historical events, the Directorate planned to create what they called optimal probability cascades, carefully orchestrated chains of events that would guide human civilization toward what they considered ideal outcomes. Wars would be prevented or minimized, technological development would be accelerated in beneficial directions, and social problems would be resolved through engineered cultural shifts. Elena realized that this represented the Directorate's endgame, not just controlling specific historical events, but taking complete control of human civilization's development. If successful, the Millennium Project would create a world where human free will became largely irrelevant, as all major decisions would be predetermined by the Directorate's calculations. Her final act was to encode a complete record of her discoveries into multiple hidden archives, using advanced encryption techniques that would ensure the information could only be accessed by future members of the Chronos Watch. She also established a series of temporal tripwires, monitoring systems that would alert the watch if the Directorate attempted any major interventions. Elena's last journal entry contained a prophetic warning: they have learned patience. The next battle will not be fought with dramatic explosions and obvious paradoxes, but through the gradual erosion of human choice itself. Watch for the world that becomes too perfect, too convenient, too neatly arranged. That will be their signature, and humanity's greatest danger. The truth about the Manhattan Project's temporal experiments remained hidden from the general public, but Elena's investigation had ensured that the knowledge would survive for those who needed it.
Her final message to future generations was clear: time belongs to no one and everyone. Those who would steal it from us steal our very souls. Guard it well. As the 21st century dawned, new technologies emerged that made temporal manipulation more accessible than ever before. Quantum computers, artificial intelligence, and advanced particle accelerators all provided potential pathways for those seeking to control time itself. The Chronos Watch evolved to meet these new threats, but the fundamental challenge remained the same: protecting humanity's right to face the future on its own terms. Elena's investigation into the Manhattan Project had revealed that the atomic bomb was never the most dangerous weapon created at Los Alamos. The real threat was the technology that could rewrite history itself, and that threat continued to evolve with each passing decade. The dark side of the Manhattan Project was not just what they built in the 1940s, but what they made possible for all the generations that followed. The battle for the timeline continues, fought by heroes whose names will never appear in history books, protecting a freedom that most people don't even know they possess. Elena Volkov's legacy lives on in every moment of authentic human choice, every genuine historical event, and every future that remains unwritten by those who would claim the power of gods. In the end, Elena's investigation had revealed the most terrifying truth of all. The Manhattan Project's greatest achievement was not splitting the atom, but splitting time itself. And somewhere, in hidden laboratories and secret facilities around the world, the descendants of the Temporal Directorate continue their work, guided by the belief that they alone possess the wisdom to shape humanity's destiny. The question that haunts every member of the Chronos Watch is not whether the Directorate will try again, but whether humanity will recognize the threat before it's too late. The future remains unwritten, but only as long as there are those willing to fight for the right to write it ourselves.